It is comparable to AIDS. We'll find out why when we return. And also meet this Gulf War veteran family whose one-year-old son has already had multiple heart surgeries just to stay alive. We'll talk some more right after the break. Please stay close. Thank you for being here today. We're talking about Gulf War babies. Now, some physicians believe that Gulf War vets may be suffering from a general overload of chemical pollutants, and that their body fluids, including their semen, may actually be toxic. Our next guest, Patricia Axelrod, specializes in medical and military investigative research, and she believes that exposure to chemicals, to radiation, and leishmaniasis, which is a parasite carried by sandflies, have all contributed to birth defects that we've been talking about in Gulf War veterans' children. How serious of a health crisis are we in with this?
I'd like you to remember the crisis that we are facing today with AIDS. And as I speak today, I'd like to remind you all that this nation turned a blind eye and a blind ear to a building crisis, and as a consequence of that, the blood supply of this country was contaminated with AIDS-infected blood. And this is the crisis we are facing today.
Has there been a ban on vets donating blood?
There was indeed a ban placed on blood from Persian Gulf War vets in 1991. Now, this ban was to have been imposed for as long as 2 years. It was prematurely lifted when the Department of Defense decided that the blood supply of American soldiers, as well as, I might add, America in general, because the blood that American soldiers donate does find its way into the mainstream blood supply.
Now, Michelle, if there was a ban, doesn't that validate this notion that these guys were exposed to something that was dangerous, that their blood is toxic?
Well, first let me say that I'm not here to talk about AIDS, I'm here to talk about Gulf War syndrome, and I think at the end of the show, people will be able to judge for themselves whether or not it's a valid comparison. Let me just throw something out, because I think it's the media's responsibility to inform people fully about all the facts. And it's very easy to sort of focus on the human drama. I mean, it's very emotional, and it's something that we can all identify with. But let me throw out a fact, and that is that 27 other nations also sent troops to the Gulf. And studies have been done globally on the coalition forces, and there's been the same findings that have been found in the U.S., which is that there's no increased incidence of birth defects, miscarriages, or cancer. And you would expect if there was a sandfly biting American soldiers, that it would also bite soldiers from other countries, and that we would see a global
Patricia's research indicates that that's true, that civilians in other nations and military in other nations are sick, and that their symptoms reflect the same.
Of all the scientific literature that I reviewed, and most recently in the respected medical journal Lancet, there's no evidence of increased incidences when you compare it to the general population.
Patricia, please respond.
Let me please respond to this, if I may. Number one, I'd like to ask you what documentation you have personally reviewed, other than perhaps studies that have been conducted by government-financed scientists.
I've also looked at evidence.
Number two, one moment, please. One moment now. You've had your chance.
No, but you haven't let me answer the question that you've asked me.
May I would like to ask you, let me give you part two of that question.
Okay, fine.
If indeed you have reviewed the data, even as it is found in the studies, the two principal studies that are most frequently cited by the National Institute of Sciences and the National Institute of Health, and also the Institute of Medicine, you will find very clearly that the data is inconclusive, that these scientists are stating, one moment here, that these scientists are stating that the processes and the methodology that are used to gather this data is flawed. And that, in fact, if you sat in on the Presidential's Advisory Committee just recently in San Francisco or in San Diego, which is coming up, or any one of these meetings, you will find lo and behold, that the scientists who are in fact working with the Navy, for instance, who is financing some 7 to 11 studies, those scientists are jumping ship. They are criticizing their own research.
Can I,
If you
may I
study
interject, because I've got to go to
hear
commercials, and I do want to continue this debate. It just seems to me that if it's inconclusive, which is the only point you've both agreed upon, wouldn't it make sense that we at least put a ban on vets donating blood, we at least encourage them to use condoms so that body fluids aren't passed along, and we at least warn them that they may be producing offsprings with deformities?
You know,
Okay, let's pick it up right there when we come back. The debate continues after this. While the Department of Defense and the experts and clearly the people on our stage continue to debate the existence of a Gulf War syndrome, the birth defects of these veterans' children are real. They've taken a terrible toll on their families. I want to get into the emotional struggle. I want to get into the financial struggles, but I don't want to leave us hanging on these very important points where we left off.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Michelle.
There's no doubt that these families are suffering. And the question that the media has to raise, because nobody else will raise it, because it's very difficult to do in the face of human drama, is, are we experiencing increased rates than from what we would expect? And I think Ms. Axelrod makes the case for me when she says the data is inconclusive. Epidemiology, which is the study of the patterns of diseases and the causes and effects and the associations between them, is very complex. We know that birth defects are pretty common. I mean, let me ask people in the audience, how many of you know someone in your family or friends, or know someone who knows someone that either has had a birth defect among children,
Yes, but
miscarriages, or
rare
cancer? Why don't we see
manifestations? Golden Heart syndrome is extremely unique.
But why don't we see in this very audience, how many of you, just raise your hand,
but I don't know what,
someone.
I mean, you could certainly do it, but I don't know what relevance that is to our discussion.
It has great relevance. It has great relevance. Let me tell you a few, let's keep a few things in mind. Out of 4 million babies that are born in this country, 80,000 to 120,000 will have some kind of birth defect. 50,000 people develop lymphomas every year. And sometimes it happens in a cluster, and people will want to make an association and say, look, all of these people in this similar group.
But shouldn't we err on the side of caution always?
Let me respond to that, too. You know, it's fine to take precautionary measures when those measures themselves don't carry risks. A dollar spent on Gulf War syndrome, listen to this, a dollar spent on Gulf War syndrome is a dollar that we can't spend on more real and proven risks and more real and proven preventative measures.
I would like
mammograms, like childhood immunization.
Please. I would like to retort, if you don't mind.
Can I have one?
Let me, if I may. First of all, as we speak of the birth defect that the Miller's children is afflicted with, the ratio in this population of children afflicted with that birth defect is 1 in 26,000 to 1 in 20,000. Now, the experts agree on that. Now, you
rare, and they happen to people.
Michelle,
Okay, excuse me. If it were the case that all of the children that were born to Gulf War veterans had a single disease, then we could suspect something. But they have such a far-ranging,
Please let me let the audience voice be heard as well, because we can debate these studies all day long. I really want to get a public response here.
All right. I have 2 points. I have 2 points to make. One of the people on the panel said that they had a child whose defects or whatever is only caused by a certain substance, and she wasn't exposed to it, so the child could only have gotten it from the father. And not only that, when the government does studies and research topics and whatever, we don't always get the facts, the true facts as they come out. And I can tell you, because I'm an ex-Marine, and I know we don't always get what, you know.
If there is mass hysteria, if there is sensational speculation in the media, there's no excuse for creating fictitious hype, but it does reflect